what's your five love language? Isn't that better than, I want you to know, by the way, this is what makes me feel loved? You're right, but it's nicer if you ask, because it's actually as if communicating, I want to know and I want to do. So initiate that conversation and you'll hear 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And the wife will ask the husband, and what's your 5? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now the key is to work on the first 2. Look at the math. There's 5. If you worked on the bottom 3 and didn't do anything in the first 2, you know what your spouse will say? You don't love me. If you do the first 2 and you neglect the last 3, not say you shouldn't, we should try to apply all of them. But if you're not paying attention to 1 and 2 and you neglect it, your spouse feels unloved. That's just the perception. But if you're fulfilling the first 2, even if you're not doing good in the bottom 3, your husband and wife will feel, I feel loved. That's the way to bring it up. I know this will be more challenging for husbands and wives that may be married longer and haven't discovered this yet. Or, and wives, forgive me for what I'm going to say. And I have to admit something. Wives have a sixth sense that us men do not have. You're already an emotional being. And you probably, without even being told what to do, know what your husband will make your husband feel loved. Us men don't have this capability. We need instruction manual. We need to be told. Not that we're not emotional. We don't have this gift of deep emotions that we can figure it out. And I know a lot of wives don't want to hear that because then it feels unnatural. But trust me, when you tell your husband, this makes me feel loved, he will go out of his way to do it. Because if in his heart he loves you with a Ghaly love, he will do it. Going back to those that are married, like for example, in that example, the lady that was married 15 years and she never got the acts of service that was her primary love language. Perception after 15 years, this is very hard. You have to undo that. But if we hit the reset button, okay, we didn't figure it out. Okay, we can start today. And let's have just a discussion. The other thing is that when you do this, in my experience, you should review it. Every judge, every 3, 6 months, every year, should review this again. Why I'm saying this? Because something in your love language can change. I remember when I first got married with Sarah, quality time was not on the top of my priority list. For me, if I had to rate them 5, I rate them 5. Quality time wasn't a big deal for me. Now, it's number 2, if not number 1. It changes with time. Something can happen. I remember one time, actually, Sarah doesn't mind that I share, in the very beginning when we first read the book and we were talking about it, and her in the very beginning, words of affirmation. Words of affirmation was a very big thing for Sarah. It still is a big thing. And I remember I was doing it in the beginning, and I found Sarah all happy and cheery, and I said, okay, keep going. And after a while, I would say nice words, and I wasn't getting the reaction that I used to get. So one day I just was asking Sarah, Sarah, I keep telling you nice words, but I don't feel like it affecting you. She gave me a thought actually, when you do something good for me, acts of service, it makes me feel more. So it changes. And it can change with time. Maybe for someone, one love language might stick their whole life. Maybe. But there's nothing wrong to ask. Review it. Every 3 to 6 months, in a happy moment. Don't bring this up in a tense moment. And ask your husband, ask your wife. Again, I'm just suggesting, if I'm going to do it in a Christ-like way, let us men be the ones to initiate. As Christ himself, the bridegroom, initiated with the church, his bride, by showing his love for us, we should initiate that as husbands. Ask your wives, if you rate the 5 love language, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then your spouse will naturally ask you, and what makes you feel loved? You will tell them 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now the key, now that you know, work at it. Work at it. And even your spouse could even give you more specifics within the topic. Like, for example, I'll give you an example, and I've heard this before. A spouse might, their love language is words of affirmation. Someone might tell you, but for me, it matters more when you appreciate something that I do. Another spouse might tell you, again, words of affirmation, I want you to like the way I admire me, the way I look, the way I dress, the way my appearance are. So maybe when they ask you, ask more questions, get more targeted answers, because that makes it easier. If you know, that will make it easier for you than a guessing game. The problem, like I said, most of us really do have the good hearts, and we have good intentions. But we didn't figure out what it takes to the spouse to feel loved. So what I'm suggesting is ask. It makes it a lot easier. And one of the things, again, don't tell your spouse what you don't know, you haven't figured out yet. You're going to shut your spouse down. Ask and review. Ask and review and apply and apply. If you do, what that does is, and it has to be consistent. Like when I mentioned in communication. Communication has to be consistent. Consistent behaviors will generally give a better outcome and a more fulfilling marriage than a warm, fuzzy moment. All the data, all the studies are out there. Consistent behaviors will affect someone's perception. Over time, I feel loved by my husband or my wife. But again, this is kind of a little bit of a summary of love languages. I do encourage you. I do encourage, again, these books, and I mentioned Love and Respect. This is carries a lot of Bible verses and explains and understands how, and that's one of the challenges, how what a man feels loved, for him, translation equals respect, and how a woman feels loved in affection and emotions. That's why love and respect, when we go to Ephesians chapter 5, which is read on the crowning ceremony, it says, let the man render to his wife her affection. That's the love. And let the wife see she respects her husband. So when we understand these concepts, now instead of feeling frustrated with our spouses, we have a better understanding, and we don't judge them, and we don't misunderstand them, and we can't figure things out because we can't come to an understanding. And if we were, and just for the sake of saying it, if we went many years applying it wrong, okay, we can modify the behavior and learn now. And if you modify the behavior, like the example that we read in the 5 love language, Dr. Garrett Chapman, when he used examples, those people started to feel different, better. That's why, again, I could be a very good Christian. I could have very strong principles and morals and boundaries, and I got those swords up to defend my marriage. But what are you defending if you're not building? What are you defending if you're not building? So we have to put the effort. This is not something, again, a warm, fuzzy feeling that just happens to make us do it, but an effort. It's conscientious, it's sacrificial, and it has to be applied constantly, not just once in a while. You do this, your marriages will be raised to a much higher level, a good feeling, and will strengthen your marriage, and really, we become unified in God's love. That's why we have to apply the Ghaly love, not the philo love, not the eros love. We have 10 minutes if anybody has any questions. I understand there will be times where it's hard because we're either tired or exhausted, but not at the cost. Maybe yes, some exceptional circumstances, and it doesn't have to be huge things. Like for example, if my spouse's love language, like you said, in gifts, I don't necessarily have to buy a very expensive gift. It could be something simple like I got you flowers, or I send you a nice even text message. I acknowledged you. It's in my experience, start with something that's easy to do. Start with something that's easy to do, that's less challenging. Like for example, I remember one time I was sitting with a couple, and the wife was, upset because she didn't feel her husband was romantic. And he said it, Abuna, I'm not the romantic type. I'm not romantic. And I told him, that's not the point. You have to be romantic. It's not about you not being romantic. You have to be romantic. That's her need. You have to fulfill that. But I was giving the guidance of start with something simple that doesn't take a lot of effort, but it's doable, and work your way up. If, for example, here's a typical one that you might see. Let's say your husband or your wife's primary love language is physical touch. Someone might have grown, or their personality, they might have grew up, for example, never seeing their parents hold hands or showing a physical affection. Maybe because we grew up on and our parents scared us to death about like even touching another boy or another girl. So when we get married, we don't know how to be physical, or I might feel embarrassed to hold my husband or my wife's hand in public. So maybe if that's not my thing, but it is for your husband, wife, start with something small. Maybe, hold hands in the car. If you feel like conscientious that someone is staring at you, do it something simple, something that you can do. Because what will encourage you is you see the tank of your husband or wife's love language get filled, and you see the response in them, you become happy, so you become more motivated. Take something small that you can do and be consistent with it. Work your way up. But you can't give the excuse, I don't have the time, I don't have the energy, because in the long term, you're going to affect negatively your husband or wife's perception. Take something small and work your way up. Be conscientious. Don't wait till you feel to do it. Don't feel, because again, that feeling, again, and I remember reading that in the 5 love language. And I've read this in other articles and other studies where it's 2 years. That's all. All we have the reserve for the emotional reserve is 2 years. That's it. After that, you have to put effort. If you don't, then your spouse will not feel loved. And you put your husband or wife in a vulnerable situation. Again, I don't need... So number one, to protect myself, I don't need to be validated by my husband or wife. I should be validated by God, because that's how I will be able to endure. But because I love my husband or wife, I should validate my love for them. Effort. Effort. Start with something small and work your way up. Keep conversating. Learn. Are mistakes going to happen? Sure, it's not intentional, but learn from it. And then see what you can do to build on what's working. And keep building, and keep building, and keep building, and keep building. And it should be both sides. Should be both sides. The other thing I would add to what Johanna was saying, I would tell any couple, you have to have a balanced life. Be careful. Some of the obstacles will be if you're putting so much into work, or you're so much into the house, or so much into the kids' needs, that we start to neglect our spouses. This is unhealthy. You have to make it happen. One of the things that we say, and to keep it consistent, like for example, as a husband and wife, you should have a date night. You should have a date night at least once a week. You should have a date night once a week. It doesn't have to be something fancy. You don't have to go to the top steakhouses. We could do that, and that's fine. But and then I know some of the issues will come with parents with small children. That's hard. How do you leave your little kids and to go out with your husband and wife? Well, you can be creative. Do something in the house. When the kids sleep, make that time for yourselves. Watch a movie together. Watch something funny. And use that time as to fulfill each other's love language. And if that's consistent, the better. Any other questions? Maybe the one topic I will leave to add is I mentioned it last week in the boundaries. One of the boundary issues is intimacy. This is the one line we cannot cross with anybody else. One of the top, I'm going to use in the negative, one of the top reasons for divorce is the lack of intimacy in the marriage. So based on your husband or wife's needs for this, if it's consistent, keep it healthy and consistent. Keep it healthy in the spirit of love. You should think of your spouse before you think of yourself. But the more it's consistent, if you're going to ask me a number, there's no really magic number, but based on the consensus of data and research, I want to be careful, sensitive of the kids being around, but the studies show that at least once a week is healthy. Any more doesn't necessarily, based on studies, make it any more happier. But it seemed like that's according to studies. And again, you have to make an effort. You can't just wait for it to just happen. You got to be conscientious, maybe plan it, but over time, this will be healthy. Even St. John Chrysostom, he mentions, when he explains in the verse, in the chapter, 1 Corinthians chapter 7, and he talks about the husband and wife that when they fast for a time, but come back together, lest Satan tempt them. So St. John Chrysostom says, and he talks about fasting, and the بيتكلم على fasting. He says, if the husband knows how to commit adultery when he has a relationship with his wife, what will happen when you have no relationship? He says one of two things will happen. Either he'll commit adultery, or he'll hold himself, but the house is on fire. And by the way, this can go both ways. But I'm just generally speaking, this is more of a need for a man. So what is he saying? Even in fasting, under one condition, both of you have to agree. So when we fast, like the church fastings, yes, we fast from the food. We should be doing that, But if we're adding the fasting from intimacy, under one condition. Both the husband and wife must agree to this. It's not recommended if one wants to fast and the other doesn't. Doesn't matter which way, husband or wife. If one wants to fast and the other cannot handle it, it's not recommended. That's what St. John Chrysostom is saying. So be careful with this. I would say with this, recommendation 1 to 2 times a week. It doesn't mean you can't be happy if you're doing it once a month or whenever, but I'm just saying based on data, based on consistency, and it's particular if that's going to be your husband or wife's need. Please be careful with that, because that's the one line we don't want Satan to cross into. And the same thing with other love languages. Fulfill your other love languages of your husband or wife, because Satan, I remember one time we had Dr. Megdi's hat was here back in 2013, 14, and he gave us a lecture on Adam and Eve. And one point when he was reading from the book of Genesis to the story of the serpent when he came to Eve, and he was as if he's having a conversation with Adam, and he said, Adam, where were you when your wife needed your ear? When you left her alone, he came and he spoke to her ear, and he affected her. So as spouses, that's the boundary part. We need to protect our marriages and fight for it, and we also have to fulfill it. And build on it. This is how we protect the marriage, and we have a more fulfilling and loving, agape loving marriage. May God, who have shown us His love on the cross, fill us and pour that love into our hearts, that we love our spouses and one another with this godly love, that we may, enjoy this great mystery of the marriage that God has, and become, as the quote of St. John Chrysostom, the husband and wife should be like the hand and eye. If we do this, we will succeed in our marriage, and our marriage will be very fulfilling. And glory be to our God forever. Amen. We'll now continue the rest of Kiyak.